They say history repeats itself, but in the Middle East it never really stopped. Decades of war, shifting alliances, and deep-rooted rivalries have shaped a region where conflict seems like a never-ending cycle. But why? What keeps fueling these tensions? And most importantly, is there ever a way out? If you think the Middle East is complicated, you're absolutely right. From ancient empires to colonial powers, from oil booms to modern geopolitics, the region has been a battleground for centuries. But to truly understand today's conflicts, whether it's Israel and Palestine, the wars in Iraq and Syria, or the ongoing tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, need to go way back. Because history isn't just a story, it's a map. And if you follow it closely, you'll see exactly how we got here. So, what's the real cause behind the never-ending turmoil? Is it religion, resources, foreign interference? Truth is, it's all of the above, woven together in a tangled mess of history, politics, and human ambition. The Middle East isn't just a region of deserts and oil fields. It's a crossroads of civilizations, where empires have risen and fallen, where cultures and religions have clashed and coexisted for millennia. And yet, the conflicts that dominate the headlines today aren't just the result of modern-day disputes. They are the echoes of decisions made long before any of us were born. At the heart of this chaos lies a web of historical grievances, colonial manipulations, and geopolitical ambitions. Every war, every border dispute, every act of violence today can be traced back to past decisions, some made in the heat of conquest, others in smoke-filled rooms where foreign powers redrew maps without thinking about the people who lived there. The scars left by these events haven't healed. They've only deepened with time, passed down through generations as unresolved grudges and nationalistic zeal. But it isn't just about history. It's about how that history is remembered, taught, and weaponized. Religious and ethnic tensions weren't always so extreme. Sunnis and Shias, Jews and Muslims, Arabs and Persians, there were times when they coexisted, traded, and even fought side by side. Yet, over time, these identities have been sharpened into weapons by those in power. Colonial rulers used divide-and-rule tactics to keep populations in check. Dictators played one group against another to maintain their grip on power. Foreign nations fueled internal conflicts for their own strategic interests. In many ways, the wars and struggles of today are not new. They are simply modern versions of ancient rivalries, amplified by global politics, modern weapons, and a relentless pursuit of power. To truly understand how we got here, we have to go back, far beyond World War I, beyond the colonial carve-up, beyond even the rise and fall of empires. We must look at the deeper currents of history, where trade routes, conquests, and religious schisms set the foundation for the modern Middle East. The battle for dominance in this region didn't start with oil, the Cold War, or terrorism. It began long before modern borders even existed. To break it down, let's rewind to a time before modern borders even existed: the Ottoman Empire and the colonial carve-up. For centuries, the Middle East was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, a massive, multi-ethnic empire that stretched across 3 continents. At its height, it controlled everything from the Arabian Peninsula to the Balkans, maintaining a complex but mostly stable system of governance. It wasn't perfect. There were rebellions, economic struggles, and power plays, but for hundreds of years, the region functioned under an imperial framework that kept its many ethnic and religious groups in a fragile balance. That all changed after World War I. The Ottoman Empire, having sided with the Central Powers, found itself on the losing end of history. Its territories were up for grabs, and European powers, mainly Britain and France, swooped in to divide the spoils. But instead of allowing the region to determine its own future, they imposed artificial borders and foreign rule, setting the stage for conflicts that persist to this day. One of the most infamous examples of this was the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, a secret deal between Britain and France that carved up the Middle East with little regard for the people who actually lived there. This colonial land grab ignored centuries-old tribal, religious, and cultural identities. Rival groups were forced together, while historical nations were sliced apart. The borders were drawn not with local stability in mind, but with European interests at heart. Mainly control over trade routes, resources, and strategic military positions. The result? A ticking time bomb of ethnic and sectarian strife that exploded multiple times throughout the 20th and 21st centuries. Fast forward to 1948. After the horrors of the Holocaust in World War II, the world grappled with how to provide a homeland for Jewish survivors and displaced persons. The United Nations proposed a partition plan for British-controlled Palestine, dividing the land into separate Jewish and Arab states. But as soon as Israel declared independence, war erupted. Arab nations rejected the plan, seeing it as an unjust imposition on Palestinian land. The result was the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, leading to mass displacements, border shifts, and the birth of one of the world's most enduring conflicts. The 1948 war created a massive refugee crisis, with hundreds of thousands of Palestinians displaced from their homes, many of whom ended up in refugee camps that still exist today. The wars that followed 1956, 1967, 1973, and beyond deepened the divide. The Six-Day War of 1967 saw Israel take control of the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights, further complicating the situation. Today, Israel and Palestine remain locked in a bitter struggle over land, identity, and sovereignty. Decades of peace talks have failed to provide a lasting solution. Settlement expansions, military conflicts, and political upheavals continued to fuel tensions. With every new cycle of violence, a peaceful resolution seems further out of reach. If there's one resource that has shaped modern Middle Eastern conflicts more than anything, it's oil. The discovery of massive oil reserves in the early 20th century turned the region into a goldmine for global superpowers. Western nations, particularly Britain and the United States, became deeply involved in Middle Eastern affairs, not out of goodwill, but to secure their access to the world's most valuable energy resource. Then came the Cold War, with the Soviet Union and the United States locked in a global battle for influence. The Middle East became a strategic chessboard. Both superpowers saw the region as crucial, not just because of its oil reserves, but because of its geographical position, bridging Europe, Asia, and Africa. The two powers backed rival regimes, supplied weapons, and orchestrated coups, ensuring that whichever government controlled a given country would align with their ideological and economic interests. Decades of proxy wars, authoritarian rule, and political manipulation that shaped the Middle East as we know it today. Take Iran as an example. In 1953, Iran's democratically elected prime minister took a bold step. He nationalized the country's oil industry, cutting off the lucrative profits that British and American companies had enjoyed for years. For Iran, it was a move toward economic independence. For Western powers, it was an unacceptable threat. In response, the CIA and MI6 launched Operation Ajax, a covert coup that ousted Mossadegh and reinstated the pro-Western Shah. For a while, it seemed like a victory for the US and Britain. The Shah maintained strong ties with the West, allowing foreign control over Iran's oil while modernizing the country in ways that pleased Western allies. But beneath the surface, resentment brewed. Many Iranians saw the Shah as a puppet ruler, and his oppressive rule, backed by a brutal secret police force, fueled growing discontent. That resentment exploded in 1979, when the Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah and established an Islamic republic led by Ayatollah Khomeini. In an ironic twist, the US's earlier intervention had paved the way for a government that would become one of its most persistent adversaries. Similar Cold War-era interventions played out across the region. In Iraq, the US initially backed Saddam Hussein as a counterbalance to Iran. In Egypt, the Soviet Union supported Gamal Abdel Nasser's nationalist regime, while the US later threw its weight behind his successor, Anwar Sadat. In Afghanistan, the Soviet Union invaded in 1979 to support a communist government, only for the US to arm and train Mujahideen fighters, including future members of the Taliban. These short-term strategies had long-term consequences, many of which are still playing out today. While foreign powers played a massive role in Middle Eastern conflicts, internal religious divides have also fueled tensions. One of the deepest and most persistent is the Sunni-Shia divide, a split that dates back over 1,300 years, to a dispute over who should lead the Muslim community after the Prophet Muhammad's death. Sunnis, who make up the majority of Muslims worldwide, believed leadership should go to a qualified community member. Shias, a minority, believed leadership should remain within the Prophet's family, through his cousin and son-in-law Ali. While this might sound like a theological debate from ancient history, the divide has deeply shaped modern geopolitics. The most visible example is the power struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two regional giants vying for dominance. Saudi Arabia, a Sunni-majority nation, sees itself as the leader of the Muslim world and has aligned with the US and other Western powers. Iran, the largest Shia-majority country, positions itself as the defender of Shia Muslims and frequently opposes Western influence in the region. This rivalry has turned local conflicts into proxy wars. In Syria, Iran backs the Shia-aligned Assad regime, while Saudi Arabia and other Sunni-majority states support rebel groups. In Yemen, Iran provides support to the Houthi rebels, while Saudi Arabia leads a coalition fighting against them. These wars aren't solely about religion, they're about power, influence, and control over the region's future. If the Cold War and sectarian rivalries weren't enough, another force has reshaped the Middle East. Terrorist organizations, groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Hezbollah didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were the byproducts of decades of war, political instability, and foreign intervention. One of the biggest turning points came in 2003, when the US invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam Hussein. While Saddam was a brutal dictator, his removal created a power vacuum. His government, dominated by Sunni officials, was dismantled, leaving many former soldiers unemployed and angry. These men, many of them highly trained, eventually formed the backbone of ISIS, a group that would go on to establish a self-declared Islamic caliphate across Iraq and Syria. Then came the Arab Spring in 2011, a wave of pro-democracy protests that initially brought hope, but soon spiraled into chaos. In Libya, Syria, and Yemen, civil wars erupted, leading to power struggles that still haven't been resolved. Weak governments, external interventions, and deep internal divisions created the perfect environment for radical groups to thrive. Today, extremist groups continue to exploit political instability, sectarian tensions, and economic despair to recruit followers. Their actions have reshaped global security, leading to military interventions, refugee crises, and policies that affect millions of people around the world. So, where does this leave the Middle East today? The conflicts have evolved, but the patterns remain the same. Foreign interference, sectarian divides, and battles over land and resources. The region remains a hotspot for geopolitical maneuvering, with new players like China and Russia stepping in to challenge traditional Western influence. That said, not every country is trapped in conflict. Some, like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are pushing for economic reform and regional stability. Israel and several Arab nations have signed historic peace deals, aiming to shift from war toward cooperation. But elsewhere, in places like Syria, Yemen, and Palestine, peace remains elusive. One thing is clear, the Middle East isn't just a region of war and instability. It's also a region of rich history, culture, and resilience. The people who live there aren't just victims of conflict. They're survivors, innovators, and storytellers. Despite everything, life goes on. Cities are rebuilt, traditions endure, and hope remains. To truly understand the Middle East, we must understand its past, because history might repeat itself, but it doesn't have to. Want to learn more about the world's most complex conflicts? Stick around for the next video.